Residents go for COVID tests to prepare for border reopening on Sunday. MTR and other transportations will beef up service for Sunday. Russia offers a brief truce in the war in Ukraine, but Kiev refuses the offer. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. The first stage of quarantine-free travel between the mainland and Hong Kong is set to resume on January the 8th, this Sunday. A government statement released today said travellers may use the same negative PCR test result to cross the border more than once. As of 6 p.m. today, more than 340,000 Hong Kong residents have booked places to travel to the mainland via the government's online system. Some time slots of the individual border checkpoints are already fully booked. Christy Khan has more.
This morning, long queues could be seen in front of a community testing station in Yau Ma Tei. Under the government's border reopening plan, the mandatory quarantine arrangement will be scrapped, but travelers who would like to commute between the mainland and Hong Kong are required to obtain a negative PCR test result within 48 hours before departure, as from January 8th. The government said travelers must perform the test within 48 hours before their scheduled flight departure time or their arrival time at mainland border checkpoints. The same test results can be used multiple times, given that its time limit is still valid when the traveler crosses the border. Travelers have to ensure that the negative PCR test result is issued by local COVID-19 testing centers or stations recognized by the Hong Kong government, and they will have to pay for the testing service. For the time being, residents can choose to use one of the two self-paced service models available in the city. These include a standard self-paced service at a cost of $150 per result, or the $240 express self-paced service. The standard service will be able to provide the test results within 24 hours. For the express one, the test results will be available within 12 hours. The authorities emphasized that the results of free COVID community testing shown in an SMS will not be accepted for cross-boundary travel. Despite the increasing demand for PCR tests in the community, some testing service contractors are confident that they have sufficient manpower and resources to handle the demand.
There are laboratories that had reduced their manpower recently, but as again, every lab contractors are well trained through the past few years. So I do believe that a majority of our peers should be able to handle the increased demand.
He added that the city is capable to conduct more than 100,000 PCR tests per day. Meanwhile, cross-border truck drivers will not have to undergo COVID tests at the border checkpoints from Sunday. They just have to provide a negative PCR test result done within 48 hours before their journey. Christy Khan, TVB News.
In preparation for the resumption of quarantine-free cross-border travel on Sunday, the MTR Corporation and several bus companies will increase their service frequency to meet the rise in demand. Memo Seng-ai has more.
Next station, Lok Ma Chau.
It has been 3 years since we heard this reminder.
Please take all your belongings with you.
Ahead of the border reopening, staff from shops at the Lok Ma Chau station were already making preparations. Starting Sunday, the Lok Ma Chau checkpoint, which will be the busiest border crossing point, will have to cope with 35,000 people traveling northwards every day. The MTR Corporation said it will increase the frequency of the East Rail Line to Lok Ma Chau trains to every 4 to 8 minutes. The MTR's head of cross-boundary operations, Zhenzi Kern, said they are capable of coping with the number of passengers since the frequency of trains will increase from the previous 90 pairs to 135 pairs. The bus company, Citybus, also said the frequency of buses B3X traveling between Two Moon Town Centre and Shenzhen Bayport will be doubled, with a bus every 15 minutes. Meanwhile, there are worries that the recent panic buying of anti-fever drugs will worsen after the reopening. In response to that, the Customs Department said random checks based on risk assessments will be conducted without any disturbances to travelers. Mimosa Nai, TVB News.
Hong Kong reported 19,722 COVID cases today. Among the reported cases, 195 were imported. 48 residents and 4 staff members were infected across 32 elderly and disabled homes. 1,791 cases were reported by 840 schools. 6 more cases involving the BF.7 strain and 1 more XBB variant infection were detected. 55 more patients succumbed to the virus. In other news now, a 15-year-old girl died and 6 others were injured in what police called a suspicious fire that broke out in Taiwan early this morning. The fire broke out in a flat on the 26th floor on May Wai House in May Lam Estate at around 6 a.m. Rescuers put out the blaze within half an hour. Inside the flat, they found the 15-year-old's body and her mother's boyfriend, who was in a coma. Meanwhile, the mother of the deceased was lying on the staircase with burns on her face and hands. 4 neighbors who suffered smoke inhalation were sent to the hospital. Some 80 residents in the building were evacuated and were allowed back to their homes 3 hours later. The police say some fire accelerant were found at the scene and the blaze was spreading at an unusually fast pace, thus concluded that the cause of the fire is suspicious. The Mandatory Provident Fund Schemes Authority said last year was the second worst performing year in its history, with members losing over $40,000 on average in their accounts. The authority explained that the plunge is due to the global economic downturn, the pandemic and geopolitical tensions. It added last year saw the second worst performance since the financial tsunami in 2008. 3 of 4 Hong Kongers sentenced to life imprisonment in the Philippines for drug possession in 2018 won their appeal and returned to Hong Kong today. The 3 released are Chan Kwok Tong, Lo Wing Fai and Kwok Kam Wah, but the 4th person, Leung Shu Fuk, is still in jail. The former lawmaker, James To, who has been assisting them, said the 3 are in good health but a little thin. To also said it was unreasonable that they had to wait for almost a year to come home after winning their appeal. Overseas, Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered his armed forces to observe a unilateral 36-hour ceasefire in Ukraine this weekend for the Orthodox Christmas holiday. This is the first such sweeping truce move in the nearly 11-month-old war in Ukraine. Kiev indicated it wouldn't follow suit. Meanwhile, Pentagon officials confirmed that the U.S. will send Ukraine nearly $3 billion in military aid. Daniel Rao tells us more.
Russian President Vladimir Putin did not appear to condition his ceasefire order on Ukraine's acceptance. At various points during the war that began last February, Russian authorities have ordered limited local truces for humanitarian purposes. Thursday's order was the first time Putin has directed his troops to observe a ceasefire throughout Ukraine. Putin acted after the Russian Orthodox Church head, Patriarch Kirill, proposed a truce from noon Friday through midnight Saturday Moscow time. The Orthodox Church, which uses the Julian calendar, celebrates Christmas on January 7th. Putin's order noted a large number of citizens professing Orthodoxy live in the combat areas. The order didn't specify whether it would apply to both offensive and defensive operations. Ukraine has quickly rejected Putin's offer for a ceasefire over Orthodox Christmas, saying there would be no truce until Russia withdraws its invading forces from occupied land. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed the Russian move as playing for time to regroup its invasion forces and prepare additional attacks. The US State Department also expressed skepticism about Putin's order.
There is one word that best describes that, and it's cynical. It's cynical in large part because it comes just days after Moscow perpetrated these New Year's Day attacks on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure. We have little faith in the intentions behind this announcement.
Meanwhile, Pentagon officials confirmed that Washington will send Ukraine nearly $3 billion in military aid. It will include several dozen Bradley fighting vehicles for the first time. The Bradley fighting vehicles are medium armored combat vehicles that can serve as a fortified troop carrier on the battlefield. Dan Norell, TVB News.
In the U.S. Congress, for a long and frustrating third day, divided Republicans kept the Speaker's chair yet again empty. This as party leader at the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, failed again to reach the 218 votes needed to become House Speaker. He has lost a string of ballots, now numbering 11 over 3 days, as a core of hardline Republicans hold out for deals and rule changes in exchange for their support. By nightfall Thursday, despite protests from Democrats, Republicans voted to adjourn and return Friday to try again. The 3-day stalemate has prevented Congress from formally opening and getting on with business. Still to come on tonight's news, the ICAC busted $500 million renovation scam. President Xi Jinping meets the leader of Turkmenistan in Beijing. Britain planning to launch anti-strike law. Welcome back to TVB News. The Independent Commission Against Corruption has smashed the largest suspected housing renovation scam in its investigation history and arrested 49 people, mostly men. The syndicate allegedly bribed stakeholders to secure different maintenance contracts worth up to $500 million.
The mastermind of the alleged syndicate was the owner of a construction company. He is suspected to have had influence over multiple building contractors and property management companies. The alleged kickbacks are believed to have ranged from tens of thousands of dollars to $1 million.
They would like to procure the assistance of these stakeholders in supporting their bidding of the relevant renovation contract. They will also, through this corrupt means, i.e. Giving bribes to the relevant stakeholders, in order to get the assistance from these stakeholders in lobbying the other property owners to buy in the relevant ideas of engaging a particular contractor.
In one case, the syndicate allegedly bribed the engineering consultant involved in a project at a housing estate in the New Territories to convince residents that a $20 million contract was reasonable. That's more than double the amount estimated by an independent advisor hired by the housing estate.
We start off with limited information. And throughout the initial inquiry, we do a lot of investigative work in order to establish that there was actually a very big syndicate behind the scene. So I think the difficulties in this case would be how to professionally deal with the information that came to us. We arrest nearly 50 persons. And this is basically, in our history, the largest enforcement action that had ever been taken in respect of building management case.
So large that the ICAC built a makeshift detention center in just one day inside its very own headquarters in order to interrogate all suspects. It's worth noting that the entire operation stems from one complaint from one resident. The ICAC urged the public to report to the watchdog if they find anything suspicious. In the end, 10 suspicious projects were identified and the ICAC successfully intervened before 8 of them could begin. The Commission added investigations are still underway and is not ruling out more arrests.
President Xi Jinping held talks with the President of Turkmenistan, Sardar Berdimuhamedov, in Beijing today. Ahead of the talks, President Xi held a ceremony to welcome the Turkmenistan leader for his state visit to China. The Turkmen president was greeted with a 21-gun salute. During the meeting, President Xi said he wants more bilateral cooperation on energy, particularly with regards to natural gas. Turkmenistan, a Central Asian nation of 6 million people, is China's single largest supplier of piped natural gas. China is estimated to have imported 23 million tons of gas from Turkmenistan in the first 11 months of 2022. equivalent to more than 50% of China's piped gas imports. The two leaders also agreed to elevate bilateral ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership. This would place Turkmenistan in the same diplomatic category as about 30 other countries, including Saudi Arabia, Australia, and Venezuela. President Xi also told his counterpart that Beijing is supporting more Chinese businesses to invest in Turkmenistan. A U.S. warship sailed through the Taiwan Strait on Thursday on what the United States called routine activity. In a statement, the U.S. military said the Arleigh-Burke-class guided missile destroyer Chung Hun carried out the transit. The warship's transit through the Taiwan Strait demonstrates the United States' commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific, the statement said. A spokesman for the Eastern Theater Command of the Chinese People's Liberation Army said it organized troops to monitor and guard the ship's transit, and all movements were under control. The British government said it would introduce legislation to ensure key public services maintain minimum safety levels during industrial action in what is regarded as anti-strike laws. This as the worst wave of strike action in decades has gripped the country and could persist deep into 2023. The development came as the ruling Conservative Party continues to lag behind the opposition Labour Party in opinion polls. Labour leader Keir Starmer pledges to end short-termism, which has led to crisis in the British economy and public services. Tracy Farnes has more.
A day after British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak promised to tackle the country's problems with his 5 pledges on issues ranging from inflation to hospital waiting lists, rail workers took to picket lines as part of a week-long strike that has paralysed the network. This as there is mounting pressure on hospitals where patients wait for hours and ambulances queue in car parks. It is the worst bout of worker unrest since the Thatcher era in the 1980s. Sunak, who took office less than 3 months ago, is under pressure to do more to resolve the wave of industrial action. The government has called on unions to cancel strikes while it holds talks, as it argues that inflation-matching pay rises will only fuel further price increases. The British government said it is introducing legislation to ensure key public services maintain minimum safety levels during industrial action. Employers could sue unions under the planned anti-strike law if minimum services are not provided. The government said it would consult on the minimum safety levels to be set for fire, ambulance and rail services. Meanwhile, the opposition Labour Party, led by Keir Starmer, continues to hold a double-digit lead in the polls over Sunak's governing Conservative Party. Starmer used his first speech of the year to criticise what he called the bland promises that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has just made.
You can't overstate how much a short-term mindset dominates Westminster. And from there, how it infects all the institutions which try and fail to run Britain from the centre. I call it sticking plaster politics. Sticking plaster politics. And in a kind of last-minute frenzy, it sometimes delivers relief. But the long-term cure, that always eludes us. And it's at the heart of all the problems we see across the country right now.
Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Britain's newspapers rounded on Prince Harry Friday after his memoir was released early in Spain, possibly through a leak. In his book, Spare, Harry discloses how his brother Prince William knocked him to the floor during an argument over his wife Meghan. William and Harry also begged their father, King Charles, not to marry his second wife, Camilla, now Queen Consort, and that he had taken cocaine as a teenager. The book is due to be published on January the 10th, but the Guardian newspaper leaked extracts overnight and other media were able to obtain Spanish-language versions, which went on sale early in Spain. The British royal family declined to comment on the book. Mexican security forces have captured a major drug cartel leader, Ovidio Guzman, a son of narcotics kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The capture sparked an outbreak of violence ahead of a visit by U.S. President Joe Biden to Mexico next week. The violence largely took place in the city of Culiacan in northern Mexico. The state is home to the Sinaloa cartel, which was headed by El Chapo before his extradition to the U.S. in 2017 on drug trafficking charges. Officials said 7 security force members were killed and 21 injured during the unrest. 8 civilians were also injured after a Mexican Air Force plane was shot at. There was a temporary closure of airports in Sinaloa's main cities. Ovidio Guzman had been captured in 2019 but was released over fears of retribution from his cartel. It is unclear whether he will now be extradited to the U.S., just like his father. That's the news. Thanks for watching.